Greetings. This is Professor Welch again, and we're now in our final review area, and now we're looking at some of the issues to be ready to discuss when you take essay questions. It's important to know about various governments that become authoritarian, why they become authoritarian, and which states have become or which governments have become that way, and which ones are likely to democratize, and under what circumstances do the countries democratize. And the countries we can look at right now that have suffered frequent wars and political pressures and authoritarian governments, one would be Syria. We know about the refugee crisis and the leaders who have been unbending in that area with authoritarian leaders. And of course the big one was Germany. Germany didn't like the result they got in World War I, and so what happened is Hitler, when he began World War II, convinced them that they got a bad deal in World War I, and now it was time to go behind his government, and that's how our World War II began. During the reign of Hitler, the core concept was nationalism, and that Germany could feel that they are superior to any other nation, particularly the Jewish community, which they hunted down and killed and so forth. So Hitler is a big example of authoritarianism. Now, if you look at countries such as Egypt and Libya, they are most likely nations that are probably going to be democratizing, and we've seen various authoritarian rules that they've had, and they are fighting for more equity and improved governance to enjoy political freedom. So the authoritarian system, I know from studying management, they say it's like Theory X, where the leader seems to have all the rights and so forth. So that's important to look at Syria, look at Germany, look at Egypt, look at Libya. And then also you can look at some of the East African countries and the various rule in that area to provide more detail about authoritarianism, about government and democracies and so forth. Now the next area of importance in looking at essays would be to compare and contrast interest groups and political parties. You can state some of the similarities and differences. In addition, you can assess what are the advantages of interest groups, what do they offer political parties, and what don't they offer political parties. Now, you need to know a definition of an interest group. An interest group is an organization of people with similar policy goals that try to influence the political process to try and achieve those goals. In so doing, the groups try to influence every branch of government. I think of the Sierra Club as an interest group, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, and they do try and influence interest groups at every level. Another issue you need to know is that interest groups are often policy specialists, whereas parties tend to be more generalists. Unlike political parties, interest groups do not face the constraint imposed by trying to appeal to everyone. Now you need to know to determine the factors that tend to make interest groups successful. Many factors affect the success of an interest group, including the size of the group, the intensity, and its financial resources. Small groups actually have organizational advantages over large groups. You need to be able to differentiate between a potential group and an actual group and determine how certain problems arise. A political group is composed of all people who might be group members because they share some common interest. An actual group is composed of those in the potential group who choose to join. Groups vary enormously in the degree in which they enroll their potential membership. And also in terms of political parties and interest groups, you need to distinguish among the various forms of interest groups. Political scientists loosely categorize interest groups into four main areas. Some deal primarily with economic issues, others with the environment, such as the Sierra Club, others with equality issues, and still others with interest of all consumers. I think of Ralph Nader and Dave Horowitz and other public interest. Although strict lobbying laws and disclosure statements have reduced out-and-out bribery, lobbyists are now allowed to generate out in the open, and we've seen interest groups such as Pharma has become a big group. One can make the argument that the growth of the scope of government in recent decades accounts for a good portion of the proliferation of interest group. As the federal government has become involved in these areas, more interest groups have arisen to influence policy. A free society must allow for the representation of all groups, yet groups are usually more concerned with their own special interests than with the needs of society as a whole. For democracy to work well, it is important that self-interested groups not be allowed to assume a dominant position. Madison's solution was to create an open system in which groups would be able to participate, and groups opposing interests would counterbalance with others. Now looking at some other issues, some electoral systems encourage the evolution of political parties more than others. Also, the type of party system that evolves is greatly influenced by the electoral system in place. Okay, you can address what I call FPTP, first past the post. This is a horse racing term, and this is the simplest example of a majority system. It's generally provided to voters in a distinct and clear-cut choice between two parties. So this is very important to research in this area of our two-party system and the majority. And we know here we have the Electoral College, and like Hillary Clinton got the popular vote, but it was Trump who was able to obtain the Electoral College. Now, looking at some other issues, some have said political systems are analogous or similar to a biological system that allows a feedback loop, such as you have input, processing, and then output. And this is the biological model. For example, there was a lot of feedback during the Vietnam War. People didn't like that war. And President Nixon, because of that feedback, he ended the military draft after that war became unpopular. In fact, when he ran, he said he had a secret plan to terminate the Vietnam War. And then when he got elected, he said, no, I didn't have a secret plan. But he, in the end, did terminate that war, which was very difficult for America to handle. Now